You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio. Welcome to the Bitter Medicine Podcast, where it's all about Black empowerment. Our show focuses on Black news and entertainment, arts, science, economics, history, people, and strategies that uplift, empower, and motivate Africans within the diaspora. And now, your host, whose favorite color is black, Goku.
Welcome back to the Bitter Medicine Podcast. This is your host, Goku. I apologize for the technical difficulties and the delay in the start time, but I'm here. Peace to you brothers who reached out to me. I couldn't announce the technical difficulty because of the situation, but I'm here now. And if I missed you, I'm sorry. I'm sure we'll catch up another time, but I'm here, and we're going to do this today. We have this paper that we're going to do today that talks about Bishop Henry McNeal Turner's African Dream. So we're going to discuss this paper. We're going to read through this paper today. Still, just a quick reminder that this show is a part of a podcast network known as KWAZ Radio Podcast Network. The other shows you should be checking out, like the Pro-Black Perspective Podcast, the Harsh Reality Podcast, and the Queen's Council. Make sure you guys tune in to those shows as well. Without further ado, let's get into this paper. Without further ado, let's get into the paper. Okay, among the various Negro responses to the American ordeal, the least known and understood is Black nationalism. It has embraced many forms, but also there has been a call for extreme segregation of the races and the establishment of all Negro governments. So this paper is from like 1967, right? So it's a bit of an old paper, right? Talking about an ancestor, a Black American ancestor from back in the day, from even before Garvey, right? He was a grown man doing his work. Bishop Henry McNeal Turner was. Right? He was doing his work even before Garvey was born. Right? Peace to the Pro-Black Perspective who's here. I appreciate you being here, sticking around. I appreciate you reaching out to me to figure out if everything was cool with me. Everything is good. I'm here right now. So I appreciate it. I'm assuming you guys can hear me pretty well, so let me continue. Although a minority movement, it has existed in one form or another among American Negroes since before the Civil War. The years between Reconstruction and World War I, the chief prophet of Black nationalism was Bishop Henry McNeal Turner, who lived from 1834 to 1915. So we know we're talking about someone who was born into slavery in the U.S. By the dates, 1915, we know he was a contemporary of the likes of Booker T. Washington, right? And back then, Bishop Henry McNeal Turner urged that Black people go to Africa. In the chat room, I see we have Kevin Care 42. Kevin Care 42, peace to you, brother. Good to see you here as well. Again, I apologize for being late. I had an issue with getting online, and I'm here now. Again, thanks to you guys like Pro Black Perspective for reaching out to me to see what was going on. But I'm here, right? So we talking about a gentleman here, and this Bishop Henry McNeal Turner, right? African of America, right? Or an African in America. What folks will call the ADOS and the FBA and all this type of stuff, right? And again, a contemporary of the likes of Booker T. Washington, W.E.B. Du Bois, born into slavery, right? Was a minister. This is what, and this is the kind of like, this is the kind of minister, kind of religious type I could deal with, right? Who's sitting up here and he's urging his people to go to Africa. To continue. Turner, a blunt, forceful man who pushed his way into the upper ranks of Negro leadership, lacked formal education or wide acceptance by Negro intellectuals. W.E.B. Du Bois remembered him as, quote unquote, last of his clan, mighty men, physically and mentally, men who started at the bottom and hammered their way to the top by sheer brute strength. But Turner was soon forgotten because journalists and historians who could have kept his memory alive had been offended by his scathing attacks on American society and upon Negroes who disagreed with his solution to the race problem, right? Despite his influence in the African Methodist Episcopal or the AME Church, the strongest Negro organization in the United States during Turner's lifetime, few mourned the end of his uncomfortable prodding toward Negro achievement and his perpetual scheming to move American Negroes to Africa. Turner's remembered at all, it is for his African dream. You know, I remember Dr. John Henry Clark talking about Bishop Henry McNeal Turner, who, if memory serves, and even a quick glance at his image tends to point to, right, was a mulatto, or you know, very high, what they call very high colored, quote unquote, high colored black person. And Dr. John Henry Clark described it as he was still black enough to get his ass whooped by white society, and that ass whooping made him like super Negro in a sense, like super black in a sense, right? It gave him, you know, it pushed his African dream from, and so hopefully this paper touches on, you know, his background like that to shed more light on it. But this guy was in a time, and I think that's really the problem that's happened. Like, I think the closer you go back to the brute oppression, right, you have people more on point, right? Again, like Dr. John Henry Clark says in past speeches, and sometimes it almost even comes down like a put down, right? But it's not really. Dr. John Henry Clark will talk about Garvey, for example, and in talking about Garvey, he will talk about guys like Bishop Turner, and he, you know, he would tell you like Garvey wasn't some new phenomenon, but instead was the continuation of a phenomenon, right? You had guys like this gentleman we're discussing right now, who, you know, who was a grown man by the time Garvey was born, right? Who was out here on the pulpit, you know, talking about the American, not the American flag, but the American rag, right? He'll spend about 30 minutes talking about everything the country did to his people, this country did to his people, before he started his actual sermon for the day. You see, so it seems to me like the further you go back, closer to the brute oppression that we endured, people really understood what was what. There were a few people who I'm sure were afraid because they had been born into, born in this country, right? And this is what they quote unquote knew, right? And so some of those latter folks, right? Those folks probably clung closer to this country than, say, our earlier American ancestors who were here, brought here, kidnapped and enslaved. You feel me? So that's the difference. Time has passed now, where we are further away from that. Well, we're further away in time from the brutal oppression, and so, white society has done this thing where they allow some folks to make it and to look like all is well and all that kind of thing. And unfortunately, the majority of the people have this belief now in this country, in this system here. By the way, if you listen to Dr. John Henrik Clarke, you realize that this problem of the so-called ADOS, FBA type stuff, albeit under a different name, but this problem has been going on for some time, right? For those of you who know already, we know about Du Bois versus Garvey. This has been going on for a certain amount of time, but it seems like we had more people at one time who kind of understood, what was the key to success for everyone else. But anyway, let me continue. Again, let me thank you guys for being here. I know I'm late today, late as hell as a matter of fact. Thank you guys for being here. Let me continue with the reading. During the quarter century after the Civil War, Negroes entertained a number of ideas about their status in the United States. The 14th Amendment granted them political rights. But politics had proved unsatisfactory with the collapse of Reconstruction. In the face of increasing political oppression after 1870, many Negroes nevertheless continued to believe that government action could solve the race problem. Read that again. In the face of increasing political oppression after 1870, many Negroes nevertheless continued to believe that government action could solve the race problem. That's the disillusion. That's the lack of understanding, right? Or too much faith in a system. You're not dealing with people who you could have faith in. Others began to stress economic achievement as a way to win respect of whites. This idea, combined with white segregationist pressure, virtually necessitated Negro self-help and racial solidarity as a means of securing the good life. Most articulate Negroes also had a vague trust in education and hard work as a way to attain racial equality. They thought it best not to arouse white anger by protest or agitation against white proscription. That's an interesting statement, right? The belief in some vague, or having a vague trust in education and just hard work will get you there is something that we still fall prey to. I know I did. How many of you listening to me right now, had that understanding? Well, you go to college, you get a degree, and then you work your ass off, and you'll do something for yourself. How many of you also had that feeling? And again, this clearly has been a feeling since the beginning of emancipation of Black folks in America. The reality of it is, and again, we still push that idea, the reality of it is, we're not getting an education that helps us really solve our problems. We're only getting an education that has us with the pass, so to speak, the hall pass, to go over to white folks and beg them for a job. So even if you do get this education that they offer you, you end up working your ass off for them and for their aspirations and for whatever it is they're trying to build. Right? In the chat room, you could see Kevin Care 42 says it's time to separate. Absolutely. Right? The false narrative of integration has destroyed a lot of our people. Absolutely. Right? And I'm sure if we did a survey, we'll find that the majority of our people maybe not as high as, say, 100 years ago, but the majority of our people still feel the same way. Right? The reality of it is this only works if you're working within your own power construct. That's when this works, right? And the idea that you don't want to arouse white anger, well, listen, that's the wrong way to go about that too, in that what you want is to have your power so that if they get angry, so be it. What you gonna do about it? Right? But you can't be subservient and poking the bear at the same time. Right? And so from that time, 100 years ago, our people should have really been changing our outlook. But again, the person who does the oppressing doesn't just sit still and let you overthrow their oppression. They work every day to keep you oppressed. Right? Some black spokesmen could not walk this path of least resistance and instead protested. Turner was one of those who protested loudly. During those years of increasing Negro frustration, Turner read of explorers and colonizers who pushed Africa to a new zenith in the attention of the world, while the fortunes of Negro Americans reached there and there. At the same time, migration was popular as millions of Europeans crossed the Atlantic in search of the quote-unquote American dream of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But the newly emancipated Negroes, who had for a time during Reconstruction seen, touched, and handled that dream, saw it begin to slip out of their hands as race prejudice increased both in the South and North. Bishop Turner transplanted the waning dream to newly opened Africa and bade his people to pursue it there. You know? Again, this is before Garvey. Right? He saw that there really was nothing here for his folks. Right? There was nothing, there was no future in this country. You guys on the Discord know I was asking around if anyone had that book, right? But he saw that there was no future in the US for black folks. And honestly, I think with the longer we stick around, the longer we fool ourselves here. Again, I know for a fact that we won't be able to get everyone just to up and leave, and I do believe you have to meet people where they are, but ultimately, down the road, I think, and sooner rather than later, I think our people need to get out of America. Use it for its resources in the short term, but in the long term, aim to get out of here. Continue. His early life offers some clues to Turner's later hostile reaction to the United States. The frustration of being so-called quote-unquote free Negro in the antebellum South made him yearn for independence from white men. Despite laws against education for Negroes, he succeeded in learning to read, write, and preach. At the age of 16, He became a traveling preacher in the Southern Methodist Church. Later, when he visited New Orleans and learned of the all-black AME church, he transferred to it immediately. He tasted glory. President Lincoln made him chaplain to a Negro regiment, but was frustrated again when white prejudice forced him out of the Army during the early days of Reconstruction. Turner's true love, however, was not the church, but politics. As an adolescent, he learned about politics while sweeping floors in the South Carolina law office. His flair for public speaking made him not only a successful evangelist, but also an effective mobilizer of Negro votes for the Republican Party in post-war Georgia. All right. He served in a Georgia Constitutional Convention and later in the state legislature. But with other Negro legislators, Turner was promptly thrown out of the assembly. Shortly thereafter, he was forced out of another position. He had been the first Negro postmaster in the state. These Reconstruction experiences confirmed his earlier suspicions that color prejudice made it impossible for Negroes to achieve equality or power in the United States. Forsaking politics for church organization, he devoted his energies to building the North-based AME church among the former slaves of Georgia. Success lifted him to ecclesiastical power in the denomination. He sensed, however, that church power was no real substitute for vanishing Negro political influence. Pessimistic about life in the United States, he was certain that the American dream was not for the black man. By the end of the 1860s, alienation had become the major theme of Turner's life. Alienation had become the major theme of Turner's life. Right? So the narrative that, you know, everyone else runs from their country, that you hear a lot of the grifters talking about now, right? But the reality is there were folks like Bishop Turner who felt like, well, the idea was you should leave America. You should run from this country. Right? And these guys didn't sit up here and talk about, well, we build this and it's ours and all that. They realize that this so-called American dream is a nightmare. Right? To his despair over the Negro's future in America, Turner coupled an infatuation for Africa. It is possible that he first became interested in the work of the American Colonization Society, the ACS, while preaching in pre-Civil War Baltimore, where ACS activity was strong. According to Turner, in 1860, he preached a sermon entitled, quote, "The Redemption of Africa and the Means to be Employed." Right? Redemption of Africa and the means to be employed. That's something worth looking up. Can we find that? That's something to look up in the future, see if we could find the wording of that speech, right? Which advocated conversion of the heathen by American Negro colonists. This concern for missions was an integral part of his African dream, and he badgered church officials to increase their missionary work wherever Negroes lived, especially in Africa. He later recalled that sermons by a Liberian missionary, Alexander Crummell, we talked about him recently, permanently converted him to the proposition that Africa was the true home of the American Negro, and indicated a way of escaping the frustrations of segregation. So, you know, that last line makes me wonder, right? Like, there's some of our early American ancestors, right? There's some of them think that Africa was the way to go because, well, damn it, we can't integrate with these folks, you know, these white folks in America. We can't integrate with them, so let's just go back. Was it that? Or was it that they recognized that if you wanted power, you had to be in a nation of your own? You had to be on land of your own, right? So was it that they recognized that the power was in the land, was in returning to the land, their land, ancestral land, right? Or was it that their frustration with not being able to successfully live amongst, you know, these American, you know, these European folks in America? Was it that they were looking to head back to Africa for? Or was it because they realized that there was power in the land that they came from? You guys in the chat room who are live with me, you guys let me know what you think about that question. Were they escaping? Were they just leaving disgruntled, you know, looking to go back to Africa because they were disgruntled, they couldn't make no headway to stand shoulder, you know, side by side with white folks in America? Or do you think it was more of an understanding there was actually power in the continent? In the chat room, NYC Beauties said it's time to separate. Y'all check out NYC Beauties, by the way. The beauty of the Black Woman Project that's done over there is pretty dope. Y'all should check it out. Kevin Care42 says, look what's going on in Texas. We have no friends in government. We have to come together and do for self. NYC Beauty says it was power and getting away from the violence. Okay, I see what you're saying. I actually like that explanation. Right? They understood that the power was in the homeland, was in the motherland, and they were trying to get away from the violence here. Okay. Okay, that's a good answer. Okay, I appreciate that. All right. A circuit preacher and Georgia superintendent, he urges people to sail for Liberia because, quote, there is no more doubt in my mind that we are ultimately to return to Africa than there is of the existence of God. All right, so this is how highly he thought of it. He thought of repatriation. Now remember, he's a bishop, right? So for him to say that, for him to make this statement tells you how strongly he believed in the concept. Right? Turner's relationship to the ACS during Reconstruction was ambiguous. He both endorsed and operated outside that facet of the white man's philanthropy. Because the colonization idea had a bad reputation among Negroes who believed that the ACS wished to deport them from their American homes, Turner advised Secretary William Coppinger of the ACS to change the name of the society to remove the stigma. Even in the face of criticism, Turner preached colonization with such vigor that in 1876, the ACS named him a lifetime honorary vice president. Although he accepted the post and occasionally made public appearances for the ACS, he devoted more attention to non-ACS immigration projects, such as the South Carolina, quote-unquote, Liberian Exodus in 1877 to 1878. When a group of Charleston AME ministers formed the Liberian Exodus Joint Stock Company, Turner pronounced his benediction as the company's ship Azor took one group of immigrants to Africa in 1878. So this is something I did not know. Right? These guys had this stock company in this in this steam line, I guess it was, right? And they were taking folks back, right? They were taking folks back. And this was in 1878. You see, so this is why the history is important, right? We, instead of focusing on what one person did or said, we need to focus on what was the context in which they said it. What was the lineage of the thought, right? I see in the chat room, we have Tetums saying, what up? What up with you? Tetums, oh, Baku Umobu in the chat. Baka Umubu is in the chat. Baka has a different name all the time, it seems like. But appreciate having you here. Again, you were here earlier. I was running late. I apologize, but I'm here. We're getting through this paper, right? 2 years later, with the support of church members in the South, where his colonization scheme was well known, Turner was elected bishop. By 1883, other Negro clergymen and secular leaders, voicing their opinions in the AME Christian Recorder, openly began to attack the bishop's ideas. And his rejoinders, Turner formulated the main points of his African dream. A vision of Negro social equality with white men was the basic theme of Turner's dream. Whoa. A vision of Negro social equality with white men was the basic theme of Turner's dream. Okay, let's unpack that a little bit. He believed that the quote unquote the great Jehovah in his all-wise providence had made a distinction in color, but not in political or social status of the human race. Okay. When it became clear at the end of Reconstruction that whites of the North as well as the South were loath to see the Negro as their social equal, Bishop Turner was disconsolate. In the South, acts of violence, lynchings, and convict labor systems grew more oppressive. This is what Kevin Kerr was referring to. Right? The equality of the races, which Turner and others sought, became less likely as political and social barriers were raised. According to Turner, the sequel to the increasing segregation would be, quote, war efforts of extermination, anarchy, horror, and a wail to heaven. This is a gloomy picture, he acknowledged. But there's only one thing that will prevent its realization, and that is marriage between whites and blacks. Social contact that will divide blood that will unify and centralize the feelings, sympathy, interest, and abrogate the prejudice, race caste, color barriers, and hair textures is the only is the only hope of our future in this country. So this guy, according to this last line here, believe what a lot of black folks today believe. Right? You hear black folks rejoicing today in this notion that America will be brown in 30 years. Not realizing that that's a loss. That's your loss. Right? That's the phenotype of you being conquered. The browning of America. Right? A lot of folks believe that, you'll hear like the typical misogynist talking about, well, love is love now, brother. I mean, and basically hinting at, well, if we don't sleep with these folks, right, because that's what we really want to do. We want to sleep with these folks, right, so that we could create. No. You're not creating anything different. There's no power in that. Like Gaddafi used to tell those Arabs leaving Libya, going to Europe to get educated, if you go and you make children with some European, don't come back. Don't even bother. Right? You can't make a strong Arab between the legs of a European. Right? I see in the chat room we got KW Don 7 is with us too. Wow, KW Don 7 always comes through even when I'm late. All right. KW Don 7 says America will be in apartheid state. And then his messages disappeared. But KW Don 7 is here. Kevin Kerr is here. NYC Beauties. Baku Mobile. The Pro-Black Perspective is here. Y'all make sure tune in tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time to the Pro-Black Perspective as well. Right? To continue, the equality of the races. Sorry. I'm in the right place. Yeah. So, so I'll just reread that last part. This is a gloomy picture you acknowledge, but there's only one thing that will prevent its realization, and that is marriage between whites and blacks, social contact that will divide blood that will unify and centralize the feelings, sympathy, interest, and abrogate the prejudice, race, caste, color barriers, and hair textures. It's the only hope for our future in this country. Right? But again, remember, Bishop here was talking about bouncing, right? But if that's what you have to do to have a future in this country, then you have no future in this country. Because miscegenation was a private matter and offered no solution for the race as a whole, he did not advocate it seriously. Okay, now we talk. But this statement illustrated the kind of social equality he thought necessary if the two races were to live together. And he observed that, quote, whoever the white race does not consort with, it will crush out. Put that on a t-shirt, right? Whoever the white race does not consort with, it will crush out. Right? This vision of equality, born in Turner's youth as a free colored man, did not die when prejudice doomed racial equality in America. Consequently, he turned his back on the nation, which had sired divisions, and looked to Africa, where his color would not govern his social status. Right? Most articulate Negroes considered emigration a price too great to pay for social equality. And then, well, that's a hell of a statement. Most articulate Negroes considered emigration a price too great to pay for social equality. Frederick Douglass, the aging abolitionist hero, reminded recorder readers that Negroes had been in America for 250 years and owed no allegiance whatever to Africa. This is where I have my problem with Frederick Douglass, right? In his view, the United States provided as good a place as any for achieving equality. Furthermore, in 1883, Northern publicity of Southern persecution of Negroes had subsidized to so great an extent that one correspondent could predict that the, quote, bloodshed of which Bishop Turner complains will never be seen by him or any of us again. Another reminded the bishop that a man's color is no evidence of his nationality and accused him of treason. Right? Accused him of treason. Right? But Turner viewed his American citizenship as all the more reason for objecting to his subordinate status. In the chat room, I see KW Dawn has said America will be an apartheid state no matter how much miscegenation occurs. It is an assimilationist fantasy. Think you'll be one with your enemy. Bravo. I gotta add a clap button to this thing. But bravo. What KW Don 7 just said in the chat is exactly, in fact, let me read it again. He said, America will be an apartheid state no matter how much miscegenation occurs. It is an assimilationist fantasy. Think you'll be one with your enemy. T. Thames or Baka Omubo says that I'm late because I was listening to the podcast and the meaning of KMT or Kemet to Modern Black Experience. Well, thanks for checking that out, Baku. Hopefully you give it a thumbs up after listening to it, shared it with your people, shared it with your folks on social media, etc. But I appreciate it. I was late myself. I'm the host, right? But I was late. I had some difficulties getting online today. Okay, so back to the reading. Objecting to his subordinate status. Quote, we were born here, he wrote, raised here, fought, bled, and died here, and have 1,000 times more right here than hundreds of thousands of those who helped to snub, proscribe, and persecute us. And that is one of the reasons I almost despise the land of my birth. Turner would have claimed the United States if he could, but to stay meant to give up his ideal of equality and achievement, and he would rather surrender his birthright than give up his dream. What do you guys feel about that last sentence? Turner would have claimed the United States if he could, but to stay meant to give up his ideal of equality and achievement, and he would rather surrender his birthright than give up his dream. Surrender your birthright or give up your dream. That's an interesting thing. What do you guys think about that? Put it in the chat room. I'll read it live on the air. Turner suggested that those optimistic Northern Negroes who challenged him in the pages of the Recorder did not understand the situation in the South, where he estimated 200,000 Negroes had suffered, quote unquote, murder and outrage between 1867 and 1883. Quote, many of us think that the acclimating headaches of Africa, though sometimes fatal, are not to be compared to such an orgy of blood and death, reported the bishop. Nevertheless, he held the North equally responsible with the South for the state of race relations because both sections had ignored the pleas of Negro victims. If the South had been guilty of slavery, the North had been guilty of slave trading and chasing fugitive slaves. Prejudice against the black man was as strong in the North as in the South, according to Turner, and he believed that although the Negro might escape the violence, he could not really change his status by moving from the South unless he left the country. And that's still true today. You cannot change your status in the U.S. Again, what you really can do in the U.S. now, more so than, say, Turner and those guys in that time, right? And remember, Turner died in 1915. That's just 106 years ago, right? We're not that far removed. That man was born into slavery, right? The difference is you have some abilities to acquire some resources, right? I'm on the Discord server for the pro-black perspective and the Pan-African Discord server, and I see where only time I say them are discussing stocks and Bitcoin and this, that, and the other, and like that's the difference that we have now. We can actually, if you search yourself, you can actually get in there, scrap, navigate yourself nicely, make a little money, and hopefully with the returns, right, you start to build your abundance, and you start to get the hell up out of here. that's what you really want to be doing. And again, we got to start devising and scheming and thinking about, when we get up out of here, where are we really going to, right, with the power to protect us. Turner understood that that place was Africa. What's our understanding today? We're still, in large part, in mass, accommodationist. We're still hoping that these white folks will start to have mercy on us and start to protect us. And like they're talking about the North versus the South, you know, I've always talked to you. I kind of look at North and South as like Republican and Democrats, right? And like, you know, the liberals or the Democrats are just as bad as the conservatives, right? So there's no shelter. You can't run and hide up under these people. There's no shelter. You just have to make up your mind that we gotta, in the next generation or two or three or whatever, we gotta. I mean, you may have to make that decision just in your own family. Maybe you decide that it's in this generation, you're done with this and you're gone. Maybe you have to make the decision that, well, you got to put in the work now so that your grandchildren can have that ability to get up out of here and be gone. But here is not it. Ultimately, here will be our death. In the chat room, I see KW Dawn 7 says, I do not see a future for Africans in America unless they create black enclaves in certain sections of the country. Kevin Care 42 says the foxes of the north and the wolves from the south. Absolutely. Absolutely. And even what KW Dawn 7 said, like those enclaves, like again, your population, as only time to say would put it, your population in a nation. Those little enclaves can do a little something for a time, I guess, you know. I think that's what black folks should be doing right now, right? But ultimately, I don't think that a long term, where you're surrounded by these folks, so to speak, I just can't see it. Again, the only thing that could allow for that to really stand, I think, is a strong Africa, right? A strong Africa. Prejudice against the black man was as strong in the North as in the South, according to Turner. And he believed that although the Negro might escape the violence, he could not really change his status by moving from the South unless he left the country. Turner reported that many Southern Negroes were eager to leave for Africa rather than sit and listen to theoretical solutions of the race problem. See, many Southern Negroes were eager to leave for Africa rather than sit and listen to theoretical solutions to the race problem. He claimed that, quote, there never was a time when the colored people were more concerned about Africa in every respect than at present. The Northern Negro is satisfied with matters and things we of the South are far from so being. Benjamin T. Banner, editor of the Recorder, articulated an opinion skeptical of Turner's followers. Because Turner knew, quote, the thought of those Negroes who read and write, he claimed that what one thoughtful man among us writes outweighs in value the whole Niagara of eloquence common to our people who talk in the vein that we know our heart's desire, we know our hearers desire us to talk. And that Turner heard only what he wanted to hear. Whatever the truth of Turner's analysis of Negro dialogue, there was considerable interest in Africa among the Southern colored people, and letters of inquiry about Liberia poured into the ACS headquarters. See, that's interesting, all right? That's it. So clearly, black folks, especially in the South where the oppression was thickest, right, in that time, were inquiring about, Liberia. Like, how the hell do I get up out of here and get to Liberia? If today there was a group that was organizing to relocate black folks in North America to the continent, what do you think? What do you think the majority of folks would have to say about it? Right? KW Don 7 in the chat room says it is a carrot on a stick game. Democrats have the carrot, the Republicans have the stick. Yep. Two sides of the same coin, right? Just playing games with our folks in the middle. By the way, I just want to thank you guys again for tuning in. Those who stuck around, even though I was late today. Those of you who stuck around and who are here with me now in the chat room, I appreciate you guys. Thanks for tuning in. Let's continue. If immigration were cowardice, as Turner charged, Turner would answer, what of it? Oh, man, I like that. If immigration were cowardice, as Turner charged, Turner would answer, what of it? Time when large populations were leaving ancestral homes and known dangers for unknown risks in new lands, immigration was not a dishonorable concept, and the bishop exclaimed, yes, I would make Africa a place of refuge because I see no other shelter from the stormy blast, from the red tide of persecution, from the horrors of American prejudice. Claiming that self-interest, self-preservation, and, quote, self in all its aspects stimulated every migration since the Tower of Babel, he saw no more shame in Negro immigration to Liberia than in the Pilgrim move to Plymouth Bay. Katana pointed out that men from all over the world were seeking out the United States as the main chance for achieving their dreams, and that even African students stayed on here after their studies ended. Quote, the idea of a people leaving a country like America to go anywhere to better their condition is like running from the sun for both. It's like running from the sun for both light and heat. Turner rejoined that America was different for the black man who had once been a slave in the quote-unquote land of opportunity. To Turner, a revolution was necessary and it must take the form of emigration to Africa. So Turner, Bishop Turner, has that thought like I do. The problem with America for black folk is that your ancestors were enslaved here, forced to work and build the infrastructure here. The people who benefited are still here. They will always look at you as their slaves. You see, that's the difference. The African students who come to America, they have a different experience. In fact, I was listening to Dr. John Henry Clark earlier, who was talking about something interesting. And he could have been alive today talking about. Right? He was talking about like the African and the Caribbean, right? They grow up in a different circumstance. They grew up in a circumstance where they're not obstructed or, or oppressed or hated, right, because of their skin color. Because where they're from, right, they rule, so to speak, right? The black in America, however, had been totally dominated ever since they were kidnapped and brought here. I've talked about this on the show in the past. It's a you move different when you grow up knowing, even though they're selling you out, but when you grow up knowing your prime minister, your president, or what have you, looks like you, and is, you know, from one of the neighborhoods that you're from. When you grow up, even let's say you grow up in a church or whatever, when you grow up and you see the priest who looks like you, when you go to the doctor, they look like you, the teacher, the nurse, etc., and so on. You're gonna come up different. You're gonna move differently. And I was listening to Dr. John Henry Clark talk about that earlier. The blacks here, the Africans here in America, didn't have that benefit. And so it's a different walk for them here, right? It's a different walk for them here. And because they are still in the land that they built, right, that they were forced to work and to build, you'll never have the opportunity here like the Europeans who they bring here in droves every year, right? You'll never have that experience, right? That's just the bottom line. You'll never have that experience. And folks are not understanding that now. You know, the grifters have folks thinking that you could have that experience too. While they sell them their flags and their DVDs and all this kind of stuff, but that's not what's happening in the chat room. NYC Beauty says a lot of our folks will stay behind. This is answering my question. If there was an organization that was offering services of relocation, right? He says a lot of our folks will stay behind. Think about that Bible story of the daughter who looked back and was turned to salt. We have to move forward and not backwards. Daily Affirmations of Pauline is in the room, right? Says thank you for the informative discussion, and you're welcome. Make sure you guys check out Daily Affirmations of Pauline, by the way. NYC Beauties says Ogun spray. Yeah, folks is telling you you ain't African, but damn sure selling you a product referencing an African deity. It's just madness, right? So to continue, Turner conceived of Africa as much more than a refuge for persecuted Negro Americans. It was the fatherland, symbol for the entire colored race. More specifically, he saw it as a political symbol because he was essentially a political man. Let me ask y'all guys a quick question. Which one do you guys prefer? I heard this comment made before that the European refers to their ancestral homeland as the fatherland, whereas the African, my eyes are itching like crazy, whereas the African refers to the ancestral homeland as the motherland, right? Which one do you guys gravitate to? Do you see Africa as the fatherland, quote unquote fatherland, or the quote unquote motherland? And what's the reason that you see it, you know, whichever way you see it, right? Tetums in the chat says he missed a lot. I don't know if you missed a lot, but you're here now, so, you know, just follow along with us, right? So to continue, quote, I do not believe that any race will ever be respected or ought to be respected, he wrote, who do not show themselves capable of founding and manning a government of their own creation. And that's what black folks don't understand, right? That's what black folks don't understand. Like, you gotta show that you're made of the right stuff, and not to other folks, but really to your own folks. right? How can we continue for generations upon generations upon generations, right? And not have, not have ever really known in any recent lifetime, right, that we created and man founded our own, governments, our own nations, right? How can we expect our people in the future to have any dignity, right, if we can't show that, in the modern era, right, we've created our nations, we founded them, we guide them, and not just doing those things, but those things could be routine chores, but actually we are in a power position. Like, we have nations that have power behind them, right? I'm going to read that again. I do not believe any race will ever be respected or ought to be respected who do not show themselves capable of founding and manning a government of their own creation. And I'm looking at you folks in the continent too. You folks who, quote unquote, got emancipation, but went right back to doing the same shit that you were doing pre-emancipation, pushing the same education, right? The same modus operandi. What did you prove, really? He advocated a complete state of 1 million civilized Christian people upon the continent of Africa, where black men could have their own, quote unquote, high officials, dignitaries, artisans, mechanics, corporations, railroads, telegraphs, commerce, colleges, etc., etc. And he dreamed of the glory that would accrue to the whole race from such a seat of power and influence. But y'all, and I'm not talking to you guys who are with me right now when I say y'all, but y'all are out here trying your damnedest to gather, the little crumbs that fall off the master's table, quote unquote master's table. Y'all are trying to gather those crumbs for yourself. When the real power is working towards a nation. It's just crazy. Fiercely independent, refusing to fawn or plead for mercy and favor from the white race, he would not permit his people to lower themselves to begging. You got these grifters like Tariq and them who when people tell them, hey, all y'all doing is begging, they're like, well, so be it. You ain't gonna shame us from doing what I mean, come on, you're begging. There's no power in that. And for for our folks in the Caribbean, there's no power in begging Chinese to come in and do shit for you either. And selling out the land to the Chinese. Fiercely independent, refusing to fawn or plead for mercy and favor from the white race, he would not permit his people to lower themselves to begging. If they were to remove the racial stigma of the symbolic past, Turner argued, black men must earn their rights in their own symbolic nation. In the chat room, I see NYC Beauties thinks of it as the motherland. I mean, that's what I grew up thinking about it as well, the motherland. Was there a switch at some time where folks thought of it as the fatherland and then later on as the motherland? But I remember reading about that, in a little discussion that Europeans tend to look at their ancestral homes as the fatherland, right? The idea behind that was that shows their, you know, the patriarchy. Whereas as Africans, we looked at it as the motherland, the land that birthed us, that produced us, right? Tatum says facts, talking about, I'm pretty sure Tatum is referring to that part where I said fiercely independent, refusing to fawn or plead for mercy and favor from the white race. He would not permit his people to lower themselves to begging, right? Daily Affirmations by Pauline says, and when one of us gets a bit more crumbs, we tend to look down at those less fortunate. Absolutely. Absolutely. Because we're following in the ways of the oppressor. We're following in the oppressor's ways, right? Responsible Negro nationhood would serve both as a symbol to the entire race and a model for the advancement of the individual Negro. That's what I was referring to earlier. Taita. That's what I was referring to earlier. Right? You have to build a nation. We can't keep allowing our people, right? I have children. One day they'll be, I'm assuming one day they'll be grandchildren. Some of you listening have children and grandchildren, right? And we don't want it to be a case where, you know, our great-great-grandchildren are still out here with no nation to look to. We have to get on top of this type of stuff. Stop the begging and start building. You're choosing the wrong B word. Stop begging and start building. Why? For this line right here, responsible Negro nationhood would serve both as a symbol to the entire race and a model for the advancement of the advancement of the individual Negro. Turner challenged his critics in the Recorder to prove that any race had ever amounted to anything if it had been, quote unquote, shut out from all honorable positions, from being kings and queens, lords, dukes, presidents, governors, mayors, generals. Answering his own question, he proclaimed, "Till we have black men in the seat of power, respected, honored, feared, hated, and reverenced, our young men will never rise for the reason they will never look up." Yeah, we got to understand how important this is. We have to understand how important this is. And this ties back to what I was talking about in previous episodes and what I was referring to earlier this episode about Dr. John Henry Clark, talking about the difference between the African of the Caribbean and the African of the continent. But he was mostly talking about the African of the Caribbean, actually. Right? And he said something interesting. He said, what was so interesting, he talked about Garvey coming up in a time where he wasn't put down because of his race. In fact, he was boosted up. But the crazy thing is that in Jamaica, like most of the Caribbean at the time, turned backwards into viewing themselves, right, from their oppressor's kind of vision. And he said, like, Garvey couldn't have done what he ended up doing here back in Jamaica. There was a time when he could have done it. Remember, it was Jamaicans, for example, who were in Haiti and helped kick off the Haitian Revolution, the greatest revolt of Africans in this hemisphere. There was a time when the people would be all about it. And as Dr. John Henry Clark said, in the whole Caribbean. But at a certain point, folks just went back to some bullshit, right? And he pointed out the Bajans, the Barbadians and stuff, you know, considering themselves black British. You know? But this is what we're talking about. Let me tell you something. You're a different person when you come out of a place where the people who hold the seat of power, who are respected, honored, feared, hated, right, reverenced, etc., is different when those people look like you. You move different. And we shouldn't hate folks for having that. What we should do is try to get it ourselves. Those of us who didn't have that need to get it themselves. In the chat room, Tatum's says to Daily Affirmations by Pauline, absolutely. That's what Daily Affirmations was saying. When one of us gets a bit more crumbs, we tend to look down at the less fortunate. Tatum says it's so sad. Daily Affirmations goes on to say the behavior bothers me to the core. NYC Beauty says we have all the resources in our community. Why would all the outsiders put their businesses there or become thieves to our beautiful culture? NYC Beauties goes on to say resources to build. Sorry. And then he says Bookman, right? Who came originally from Jamaica into Haiti and was instrumental in the Haitian Revolution. As Dr. John Henry Clark jokes, Bookman was so on it, Dessalines and them had to run to catch up, right? But there was a shift in the mindset at some point where folks, you know, started embracing that British or French rule in the Caribbean, right? And so a lot of what Garvey was able to do, he wasn't able to really do it back in Jamaica. There was a time when he was growing up, he could have done it, which was funny. Right? But then there was a time afterwards where even he couldn't go back and do it again. Right? But this is what I'm talking about. And this is what I've been talking about in this podcast for the longest time. And it's about power. And it's about educating your people to want power. It's about educating your people to attain power. Right? That's what that's what we have to focus on now. Because it changes the people. When you have a power, you remember Eddie Murphy? I think it was Raw, right? Eddie Murphy was cracking a joke, but remember that special came out way back in the day in the 80s when Rocky was a big thing. The movie Rocky with Sylvester Stallone, that was a big thing. And one of the jokes Eddie Murphy tells is about, you know, when Rocky came out, you know, there's this boxing movie with this white boy who was the underdog, but, you know, overcame and all this old bullshit, right? He said Italian dudes were coming out of the movie theaters, grabbing their crotch, looking for a fight. That's the kind of thing that we're talking about here. Once you see power, whether you see it on a screen, you read it in a book, you see it practiced in a nation, right? It changes the people. The people change, right? And that's what you want to do for your people. And the more we sit around not doing anything, man, the worse it's going to become for our folks in the future. Recalling the biblical story of the nation of Israel, smitten by fiery serpents in the wilderness, he cried, quote, "Oh, for some Moses to lift a brazen serpent, some goal for our ambition, some objective to induce us to look up. Let the brave-hearted man who advanced enough to peril land and sea in search of better conditions, raise a banner standard. And this is something from the Bible for all you biblical folks. This is why I don't respect, you know, a lot of you religious folks, because even inside some, you know, some of these books that you guys adhere to, they tell you what to do, but you all wait until death to do something. Tanner reminded the bishop that Negroes already had nations and governments in Haiti and Liberia, and that many colored men were doing well enough in the United States. But you see, the problem with Tanner, right? Tanner is what we would call the ADOS type, right? Problem with Tanner is, you see this phrase, doing well enough? That's no good. That's bullshit. We're not out here trying to do well enough, right? We're not out here trying to do just well enough. Again, it's about abundance, right? It's about abundance. That's what we want. And that's what power affords you. Power affords you abundance, right? But Tanner, writing from the South, where he had seen men, quote, sit down and cry because they were compelled to hire out their daughters as chambermaids after spending all they had to give them an education, obliquely discounted Tanner's illustrations as incapable of producing the desired results. What was needed, Tanner insisted, was an outlet, a theater of manhood, an activity established somewhere for our young men and women, a state that the world will respect and whose glory and influence will tell upon the destinies of the race from pole to pole. Our children's children can rest securely under its aegis, whether in Africa, Europe, Asia, America, or upon the high seas. Turner was correct. All right. Turner's symbolic African nation embodied most elements of the classic American dream. He was echoing the old chorus heard among American colonials and immigrants. Hope for a fresh start where man had self-government and freedom from persecution and aristocracy, where land was available and where economic opportunity beckoned, where every man was judged on his merits and could even become president. Where have we heard this before? All right. Where there was freedom from old prescriptions, where there was the challenge of a land to be developed by the democratic process and civilized by Christianity. Okay, whatever about that. Turner also had a well-defined theological view of Negro history, which divined a great destiny for his black people. He explained that God had allowed white men to bring black men to America because the African needed the civilization and the Christianity of the United States, a nation consecrated as a sanctuary from persecution and peonage. Not that God endorsed slavery as such, Turner asserted, but he permitted it as a test of the white man's obedience, because the two races were to embrace one another to work out the problem of civilizing and redeeming Africa. This is why I can't stand a Christianized or Islamized Negro. Well, a lot of folks don't talk about it, but you know, I had this kind of beef on a basketball court with an African one time. Well, a few times, but this one time, you know, I had to let this dude know, like, you know, the disappointing thing about, you know, and it was something he said about black folks, you know, outside of Africa. I said, the disappointing thing about you guys, right, like you guys who are here talking about akatas and all this type of stuff, is that us black folks from outside of the continent actually look up to y'all in a weird way. We look up to y'all because you guys are like the genuine article, so to speak, right? And I had to tell them, it's because you MFers, with your Islam and all that old shit, sold us folks out. Right? Because your Islam had you thinking, well, it was Allah's way. It was Allah's will. And Christian folks ain't much different. Oh, it was God's will. Nah. I don't accept that. I don't accept that. And I look at folks, so just so you guys will understand me in the future, I look at you religious folks and I keep an eye on y'all because I know that because of your brainwashing, right, your belief that it's God's will, whatever happens, I know that you guys will sell me and everyone else down the river because it was Allah's will. It was God's will. Nah, I'm good on you. And so even with Bishop Turner, and this is why, we've had some conscious religious folks. I was thinking about James Cone earlier today. James Cone, who died, I think maybe like within the last 2-3 years. A contemporary of Martin Luther King Jr. and stuff like that. Those guys were religious guys, but they weren't suckers to the full extent, right? Bishop Turner here still has a little sucker in it for this religious stuff, right? That it was God's will that we was kidnapped and brutalized, and it was a test of white man's obedience. Man, get on with that bullshit. Get on with that foolishness. NYC Beauties in the chat room says there's no barriers these days to get an education. No excuses. Yeah, there's no excuses. There's no excuses to not be better and do better. Daily Affirmation by Pauline says the barrier to an education is the high interest rates on the student loan debt. I know someone who owns $100K for a master's in psychology. I'll do you one better. I know someone with over $100K in debt for a social worker, a master's in social work. Like from one of these big time universities in NYC. And I'm like, social work? All right. Turner acknowledged that the white man had exploited the Negro. This had been a historical necessity for natural growth. But the white man defaulted his obligation to God, the black man, by forbidding his servants to improve themselves. Quote, we gave the white man our labor. Yes, the bishop proclaimed. In return, he should have educated us, taught us to read and write, at least, and seen that Africa was well supplied with missionaries. Again, this is where these Negroes lose me. This is where these Negroes lose me. To Turner, a redeemed continent, a quote-unquote city upon a hill, was still God's goal for Africa, and it would be accomplished by former slaves. Quote, any person who opposes the return of a sufficient number of Africans' descendants to begin the grand work, which in the near future will be consummated, he insisted, is fighting the God of the universe face to face. Oh, good Lord, the vapors. I have the vapors now. Let me pause here for a station ID break. I'll be back on the side. Once again, I want to thank you guys who are here, who are sticking around and taking in this episode. I'll be back on the other side. Hang in there.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
This is DAX. You tune into the Harsh Reality Podcast, providing you with social commentary on the news affecting our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-black perspective, where black problems are addressed with black solutions.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
All right, and we're back. Make sure you guys tune into all of those shows on KWAZ Radio. Tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. usually. I know Only Time Say has the Sunday Worship, Pro-Black Perspective Worship episodes. You guys tune into that tomorrow as well. Yeah, so in the chat room before I went to the station ID, I saw where Tatum's says damn. I don't know if he was saying damn to Daily Affirmations by Pauline, who said she knows someone with $100K of student loan debt for a master's in psychology, or my version of someone with about that or more debt in social work, right? Master's of social work. KW Don 7 says Biden has already reneged on the $50,000 student loan forgiveness program, which I was going to do a rant about that the other day, and I got tied up. But that just goes to show you something, man. If you don't, when you're powerless and you're not serious about getting power, that's the kind of stuff that happens to you. Like, where's the punishment from black folks? Now, interestingly enough, with that Biden stuff, I did peep a lot of white folks on social media was like, and because of that, right after Biden made some statement like I can't do it or whatever he said, I saw a lot of white folks on social media were like, oh yeah, and because of that, you won't get more than 4 years. So that's how you have to think about politics. If you're not getting what you were promised, you're not getting what you negotiated, and that's the thing, we're not negotiating, right? All now black folks in America should be negotiating for tangibles for the next 4 to 8 years. If Biden them want to have power again in 4 years, well, we need to see this, that, and the other done before that election happens. All now you're supposed to be putting in that work, and I don't see it happening. I just hear more complaining about immigrants. But white folks who voted for Biden, who believed in that forgiveness program, right, and to see him come and renege on it, Biden might catch his ass for that in a couple of years. Because I already saw them talking about, well, you won't get my vote. You will be voted out next election, right? You have to punish these folks. You bargain with them to get what you want, you hold them to it, and if they renege, you get them up out of there as soon as possible. Turner saw the mission of the immigrant Negro as not only to convert the African, but also to help him to withstand the white invaders. I have a quick question for you guys. I don't know the answer, but if any of you are religious folks in the chat, or even formerly religious folks, right, and someone came to you talking about what Turner here was talking about, right? That the white man had exploited the Negro, right? But this was a historical necessity of natural growth. But the white man defaulted on his obligation and all this old shit. Would you accept that? For those of you, number one, who are religious still, are you really accepting that bullshit today, right now? Are you really listening to someone in a pulpit tell you that today, right now? That's my question. And if you were previously or prior religious, would you have accepted that, do you think, during your time of being a religious person? You can answer that in the chat room, Alan. I'll read off your replies live on the air. The European scramble for Africa was well underway by 1883, and Turner feared that the same Europeans who once stole Africans from Africa would now steal Africa from the Africans. He chided Turner for being content just to meditate and wait till the whites go over and civilize Africa and homestead all the land and take us along to black their boots and groom their horses. Wait till the French or English find some great mines of gold, diamonds, or some other precious metal of treasures, so we can raise a howl over it and charge the whites with endeavoring to take away our fathers' inheritance and lift a wail for the sympathy of the world. And that's exactly what we ended up doing. Turner urged Negroes to seize the initiative to make Africa the black man's preserve. Man, if it wasn't for this dichotomy of guys like Turner and them, I could kind of be cool with dudes like that. But all that shit about it was God's will and Allah's way and all that, nah. Contrary to misinterpretations by his critics, the bishop did not recommend a wholesale migration of all Negroes to Africa. The anti-immigrationists confused Turner's stand with that of the antebellum colonizationists who wanted to remove all free Negroes. After emancipation, even the ACS had necessarily changed its approach, and Turner never advocated the idea of shipping millions of black paupers into Africa. Quote, such a course would be madness in the extreme and folly unpardonable, Europe. 5,000 or 10,000 a year would be enough. 500,000 civilized Christian Negroes would be enough to build a nation of which Turner could be proud. But those 500,000 repatriates would have to be well chosen for, quote, all the riffraff white men worshippers, aimless, objectless, selfish, little-souled, and would-be white Negroes of this country would be useless in Africa since they had no confidence in themselves or other black men. Put that on a shirt, underdog. I could do it out the civilized Christian talk, but put that on a t-shirt, underdog. All right? All you dusty dudes who I talked about a couple of episodes back. By the way, someone reached out to me and told me, oh, I don't like you name calling. Dude, if you're a dusty dude, you're a dusty dude. All right? But all these riffraff, white man worshippers, aimless, objectless, selfish, little-souled, and would-be white Negroes of this country, would be useless in Africa since they had no confidence in themselves or other black men. Right? Only the proud and resourceful could contribute to this symbolic state. Brave, ambitious, educated young men and women would be necessary to raise a nation worthy of respect. Furthermore, capital and technical ability would be needed to carve a strong republic from the wilds and to lead the natives of the Dark Continent to their destiny. Quote, all this jargon about Bishop Turner trying to get all of us colored people out of the United States is not only nonsense, but absolutely false, Turner insisted. For 2/3 of the American Negroes would be of no help to anyone, anywhere. You know, if you take that Christianity out, this guy, not a bad guy, right? 2/3 of the American Negroes would be of no help to anyone, anywhere. Unfortunately for his plans, those Negroes who came closest to his specifications were the ones least likely to forsake the gains they had made in the United States. This is what Daily Affirmations of Pauline was talking about. They get their little crumbs, they look down on everyone else. They ain't going nowhere. Moreover, as wealthy George T. Downing, who spoke for many urban northern Negroes, reminded Turner, the most cultured, experienced, energetic, and moral Negroes were the very persons we are most in need of at home. We are not sufficiently represented in the needed character to upbuild Africa. We have not sufficient of it for home needs. This is our great misfortune. Certainly we have not a scholar or businessman to spare. One promising young Negro accepted Turner's challenge. T. McCants Stewart had been born free in Charleston, South Carolina, and received his education at the University of South Carolina and Princeton Seminary before being assigned to the large and affluent Bethel AME Church in New York City. February 1883, in the midst of the debate between Turner and his critics, Stewart dramatically resigned his pulpit and announced that he would soon sail to teach in Liberia College. His Liberian letters were optimistic. But in 1885, Stewart was back in New York, complaining that the school was too weak to deserve the name of college. Turner chided him, suggesting that he go back and strengthen it himself. But Stewart remained in the United States to seek his fortune in Brooklyn politics. 20 years later, when white politicians thwarted his progress, he returned to Liberia, but his ambivalence demonstrated with what reluctance cultured, ambitious young Negroes turned their backs upon the American dream. They were ever hopeful of success in the United States, and even when they wavered, they doubted that going to Africa would actually bring the dream to reality. American Negroes asked many questions about the suitability of the Dark Continent, questions raised by ignorance, by deliberate misinformation, and by the grim accounts of some disillusioned emigres and travelers. Chief among these threats to Turner's scheme was a complaint about the climate and the fever. Some of the Azore immigrants had returned to South Carolina with accounts of how 10% of their group had died on arrival off the African coast, and the letters from those who remained in Liberia told of death and disease in the fever swamps. Furthermore, during the Liberia Exodus of 1878, some South Carolina white men who feared the loss of their labor supply had magnified the tales of horror about death and slavery in Africa. See, these guys are always playing the game. Are you playing the game well enough? Right? Some people died, but these white folks went and exaggerated the numbers, talked about death and slavery in Africa, dissuading you from wanting to go. To continue, Negroes who were disposed to stay in the United States did little to brighten the image of Africa. Turner answered the nonsensical jargon that the climate of Africa is against us. We can't live there, and the tropics are no place for moral and intellectual development. God had created Africa, and to deny that it was good charges God with folly, because man is a cosmopolitan and his home is everywhere upon the face of the globe. Although he admitted that there would be problems adjusting to the new climate and deaths from the mysterious African fever, he insisted that the white men then working in Africa were disproving the old myths about African health. Right? By the way, let's time out for a second. They do this shit now. Right? They make you seem like Africa is the worst place to go, right? This, that, and the third. Meanwhile, from my understanding, on any flight to Africa, there's a gang of Asians and Europeans on those flights going to Africa. To continue, even the fever, he argued, was better than dying at the hands of lynch mobs in America. Why would Negroes balk at the risk of undertaking a divine errand into the wilderness? Turner assured self-sacrificing pioneers that in losing their lives for the dream, they would indeed find them. You know what this reminds me of? Kind of weirdly enough, and it's kind of timely. I don't know if you guys pay attention to this type of stuff, but they just landed a new rover on Mars. And then some people started to complain about that. Y'all got money for rovers on Mars, and y'all don't have money for infrastructure in America, and blah, blah, blah. But the reason I bring up Mars is because a couple of years ago, in fact, maybe even last year, in fact, I think it was Tesla, the guy who owns Tesla, whatever his name is, was saying that we're gonna have to send people to Mars, and the understanding is gonna be that folks are gonna die. Folks who are gonna go aren't gonna be able to come back in this lifetime. They're gonna build infrastructure and they're gonna die there. That's how these folks think. When you read that book that we did in the book club about what was going on in the Congo, right? The Ghost of Leopold, or whatever it's called. When we talked about that book, if you peep it, those white dudes was going in there getting sick, dying, and they'll send another white dude right behind him. They'll send him to say, well, go see if you could find him. And if you don't find him, well, at least continue what he was doing. Meanwhile, y'all, we afraid to go back to our actual homeland. For the practical questions of money and transportation, he had two ready answers. First, he believed that the United States government should appropriate money to assist Negroes who volunteered to settle in Africa. According to Turner's calculation, the nation owed American Negroes about $40 billion, estimating $100 a year for 2 million of us for 200 years for services rendered during slavery. Right? Because you see, Turner and them was thinking, though, because other nations were turning their attention to Africa. He believed the United States should perform its role and send its Negroes to evangelize, civilize, and commercialize the quote-unquote new continent. But if government funds were not forthcoming, he had a second plan which called on American businessmen, both white and Negro, to establish regular trade and transportation links with Liberia. Because, quote, there was a general unrest and a wholesale dissatisfaction among his people. Turner promised that if a line of steamers was started from New Orleans, Mobile, Savannah, or Charleston, they would be crowded to density every trip they made to Africa. He ignored the fact that the ACS chartered ship Monrovia made its annual trip to Liberia with only 4 families of immigrants. Nevertheless, the ACS noted that, quote, so numerous have the applications become that the society will hereafter give the preference to those who will pay a part of the cost of their passage and settlement in Liberia. Negro ideas about the race problem were in flux at the time of the debate regarding colonization. Most articulate Negroes nevertheless opposed immigration. Like Tanner, Douglas, and Downing, Turner's other opponents lacked clearly defined ideologies. They fluctuated between protest and accommodation, integration and Negro solidarity, but they concurred that going to Africa would not help. John W. Cromwell, editor of the People's Advocate, insisted that Negroes were doing all right in the United States. They needed only to work harder. Charles W. Porter, a physician and AME pastor, suggested that Negroes had better learn to be self-reliant in the United States before heading to Africa. Now that I agree with. Quote, what in the name of sense, asked the Reverend James H. Turner, will a legion of insignificant, dejected mendicants do toward the reforming of that benighted land? Most Negroes who wrote asserted simply that they were Americans and intended to stay in their homeland. J.C. Embry, later an AME bishop, asserted that the climate of Africa would drain off all the energy of the American Negro. Quote, the truth of the present and all future time, he added, is the Negro cannot escape from the presence and influence of the white race in any habitable part of the globe. This is the same shit you hear, by the way, this is the same stuff you hear Tariq Nasheed them talking about. Well, the white supremacists have dominated the whole world. Where can you go and not be from underneath, you know, these white supremacists. Dude. So clearly he had some ancestors back in the day who were saying stuff like this back then. The Negro cannot escape from the presence and influence of the white race in any habitable part of the globe. To human view, the stern, irreversible decree of heaven has sealed these two peoples in a common destiny. Although most Negroes who wrote about the issue opposed immigration in any form, several spoke out in support of it. Among them was AME Bishop R.H. Kane, a congressman from South Carolina during Reconstruction who predicted that, like Israel in the wilderness for 40 years, Negro Americans might have to wait until the old generation had died out before the new would follow Turner to the promised land. Don't we always talk about the old generation or the older generation of black folks and how they hold everything up? Isn't that something that we still talk about today? More cautiously, T. Thomas Fortune, young editor of the New York Globe, reserved judgment. Quote, immigration may yet play a very important part in the solution of the question of our position in this country, he acknowledged. We will say this much, that Dr. Tanner may speak, in his view, the prevailing opinion of northern colored men, while Bishop Turner may speak that of the South. But whatever may be the wishes of the thoughtful men of the race, the masses of our people in the South are growing fearfully restless. Whatever the impacts on others, the debate had led Turner to formulate the ideas which had been ripening for years, and there would be little change in those ideas throughout the rest of the long and active life. Only the intensity of his vision of Africa would change as the status of the Negro in America fluctuated. That status was drastically reduced in 1883 when the Supreme Court nullified the Civil Rights Act of 1875 in a decision which declared that the federal government could not prevent racial discrimination by private parties. To Bishop Turner, hypersensitive to the question of social equality, the civil rights ruling symbolized all that was wrong with the American attitude toward the Negro. He believed civil rights to be, quote, as far above politics as heaven is above earth. Instead of being a political issue, he wrote, it involves existence, respect, happiness, and all that life is worth. As Turner viewed the decision, it sent the Negro back from the federal government, which granted and guaranteed his freedom, to the states which had opposed that freedom in the first place, and it was now up to the white people of the respected states to decide whether we shall be treated as people or dogs. And as if to clear the way for emigration to Africa, he declared that the court decision absolved the Negro's allegiance to the general government and makes the American flag to him a rag of contempt instead of a symbol of liberty. Right? A rag of contempt. But you got folks reveling in that flag right now. Right? Moreover, the Constitution itself was a dirty rag, a cheat, a libel, and ought to be spit upon by every Negro in the land. Right? Put that on a t-shirt. Right? The only alternatives he could see were Africa or extermination. Thus, the bishop reiterated his disillusionment with the United States and urged more strongly than before that his people leave the land of broken promises for Africa. The disillusionment, strong and bitter as it was, did not move Turner himself out of the country any more than it removed the Negro masses. During the next decade, although he was engrossed in ecclesiastical business, it was impossible for him to ignore the racial problem. He never renounced the appeals of Africa, but he used his growing church and civic influence to make the best of the bad situation in America. Convinced that the Republican Party had been defeated in 1884 because it abandoned the Negro, Turner exerted his leadership to pull colored men into the Prohibition Party. He even endorsed a number of Democratic leaders, especially after Senator John T. Morgan, an Alabama segregationist, introduced a Senate resolution calling for federal assistance for Negro immigration. Even though by 1895, Turner wielded enough political power to have his candidate named minister to Liberia, he never found enough success in political maneuvering to warrant relinquishing his African dream. If he grew more ironic toward white politicians, he was less accommodating to the Negro people, and his blunt evaluation of scullion, quote-unquote scullion Negroes, were opposed colonization schemes, alienated many people. He accused 3/4 of the Negro Americans of doing nothing day and night but cry, glory, honor, domination, and greatness to white. Oh, I have about 7 T-shirts I built in this one podcast. He accused 3/4 of the Negro Americans of doing nothing day and night but cry, glory, honor, dominion, and greatness to white. To achieve either the American dream or its dark reflection, the African dream, Turner demanded a basic change of heart in the colored man. For, quote, a man must believe he is somebody before he is acknowledged to be somebody. Neither Republican nor Democratic Party can do for the colored race what it can do for itself. Respect black. Respect black. To stress the point, he proclaimed that, quote, God is a Negro. Even the heathen in Africa believed that they were created in God's image. But American Africans believed they resemble the devil, and hence the contempt they have for themselves and each other. All the more reason, he urged, for a Negro nationality where black men can be taught to respect themselves. His personal manner and his emigration ideas offended so many middle-class Negroes that he received little cooperation when he worked for unity among several colored Methodist denominations. In 1891, the AME Council of Bishops authorized Turner to visit Africa. He had long wanted to travel to the fatherland, but his church was financially weak. It could not afford to send him, and its small missionary effort had been confined to a few workers in Haiti and British Guyana. There were a few AME churches functioning in Liberia and neighboring Sierra Leone. Without substantial support from the home organization, the African churches struggled along, ministering to the immigrants, converting a few natives, and attracting dissident members of white-dominated mission churches. Although officially Turner was to organize the AME churches to achieve better supervision and support, the bishop viewed his trip as a pilgrimage to compare the real Africa with his dream Africa. Despite continuing unfavorable reports from other travelers, Turner confidently expected to, quote, see or hear nothing that would change his convictions, end of quote. His first contacts with Africans on board ship brought ecstatic reports. In his letters to the reporter, Turner reported that he had received a tumultuous welcome in Sierra Leone, which was matched by his own emotional embrace of Africa. When the people of Freetown heard of his arrival, they streamed to their waterfront to meet him. He wept as he set foot on African soil. He was enraptured with the continent's geography and people. Instead of miasmic swamps, he described a clean, healthy city on hills rising from the harbor, black men standing erect and proud. He spoke to the governor of the colony, visited prosperous homes and businesses owned by blacks, and worshiped with natives, quote, right from the bush with a mere cloth over them, but who were full of the Holy Ghost. All that he saw, he pronounced good. Turner moved on to Liberia and recorded similar impressions with one major addition. Liberia was a free republic, not a colony, and it boasted a black president and government, the ultimate in political and social achievement. One thing the black man has here, wrote the bishop, and that is manhood, freedom, and the fullest liberty. He feels like a lord and walks the same way. Turner traveled about the country visiting the immigrant settlements, mission stations, and native villages, reporting the great promise of the coffee plantations, coal and iron deposits, and the general potential for rapid economic growth. If other travelers spoke adversely of the weather and fever, Turner scarcely mentioned the problems, since he visited Liberia during the dry, healthy season. In any case, he noted the highlands were always healthy. If white missionaries could safely live there, so could Negroes. And that's the thing I just didn't understand. Dude, if these white folks can be there, why can't you? If white folks could be there, why can't you? African people impressed Turner as much as African land. He praised the well-educated Muslim teachers who were present in all of West Africa. Their learning and wisdom awed him first, and he had to rationalize that their strong African-based religion, a keen competitor for the faith of the natives, was actually preparing the way for Christianity by forbidding the terrible liquor traffic by which white traders debauched the people. He differentiated between the various tribes of natives who lived in Liberia, noting that the Negroes from the Congo region, released from slave ships and planted in Liberia by the American Navy, were the least of the Africans. Furthermore, an ancient citizen of the place told Turner that in the slave days, they never, quote, used to sell big blood Africans to white men, except we catch them in war. This statement convinced the bishop that most American Negroes, especially those who disagree with him on immigration, were descended from the weaker Congo people. Ouch. Who had always been slaves, even in Africa. Turner himself claimed descent from royalty. We've read that before in other papers, that for some reason folks in the Congo weren't well liked, it seems, by others, right? Most of the people in Liberia were worthy inheritors of the bishop's dream, and his glowing account beckoned Negro Americans to repatriate themselves and take advantage of the opportunities in trade, mining, and agriculture, and most of all, in equality and respect. Africa was all Turner dreamed it could be and more. Quote, "I get mad and sick," he wrote, "when I look at the possibilities God has placed within our reach, and to think that we are such blockheads, we cannot see and use them." The native Africans, doubtless following Turner's lead, could not understand why, quote, "the black man in America is at home across the sea." By the time he left for the United States, he was more convinced than ever that the status of the Negro in America was closely tied to the condition of Africa. Quote, "I see the wisdom of my position now as I never dreamed before," he wrote. "If the black man ever rises to wealth, he will never do it by trying to be white or snubbing his native country, Africa." As in earlier years, few Negroes followed Turner's advice, in part because of the style of his leadership. When speaking to colored men, he was callous and contentious, particularly as he grew old and survived to become senior bishop in the church. Starting in 1893, he edited his own newspaper and could use unrestrained language to attack the anti-immigrationist, the rich, the ignorant, and the would-be white Negroes who lacked race pride. Quote, "We have been denounced and ridiculed 1,000 times," he sneered, "by a number of these mushroom pimps who know how to scribble a little on paper for the public press. It was these northern coons who made the color problem worse by presuming to advise the southern Negro on the race issue. And it was the scullion Negroes in the South, lacking the ambition or quote-unquote animal instinct to either fight or run who drew his scorn. He could categorize the opposition into either, quote, this young fungus class, or, quote, those old fossils who were in the slave pen when I was an officer in the army trying to move heaven and earth to rescue their freedom. In 1893, alarmed at the increasing tempo of lynching and race violence, Turner summoned a representative gathering of the quote-unquote the Friends of African Repatriation or Negro Nationalism elsewhere, but not the quote-unquote stay-at-home portion of the race. Many Negro leaders agreed to attend, but they opposed mass immigration, although a few acknowledged that some colored men might find homes elsewhere. In the face of strong opposition, Turner shifted the emphasis of the meeting from immigration to general protest, and in an eloquent opening address, pleaded for action to alleviate the condition of Southern Negroes. Conceding that he might be, quote-unquote, over-gloomy, too despondent, on the plane of despair, he put the choice to the convention. Quote, it devolves upon us to project a remedy for our condition, if such a remedy is obtainable, or demand of this nation $500 million to commence leaving it. The more than 600 delegates with little hesitation chose to seek the remedy at home rather than in exile. They sent memorials to Congress, to state governors, and to the American people, and they formed an Equal Rights Council with Turner as chancellor. The pleas went unheeded, the council never functioned, and the Negro press generally labeled the quote-unquote Turner Convention a failure, for their editors warned God against immigration ideas. Turner retorted in sour grapes fashion, quote, what under heaven would I want with a national convention to endorse African immigration when at least 2 million of colored people here in the South are ready to start for Africa at any moment? There is considerable evidence that a large number of Southern colored people were willing, if not eager, to escape from the violence of America to the dreamland of Africa. This is what Kevin Care 42 mentioned earlier in the chat room. A few Negroes wrote letters and articles supporting Turner's position, but a more relevant indication is found in the large number of applicants for transportation to Africa and in the persistent appearance of assorted companies and societies designed to provide such transportation. In fact, letters of inquiry and application overwhelmed the immigration companies, the ACS, and Turner himself, who since 1893 had served as Liberian consul in the southern states. Hold on one second. Turner hailed each new immigration scheme, endorsed a number of them, and reported their progress. Most such schemes failed and were surely fraudulent, but enough were genuine to keep a trickle of immigrants moving to Africa. Financial problems were the primary barrier to actual immigration. We talked about this in the chat room last week. Petitions asking for money to emigrate flowed continually to Congress and the state legislators during the 1890s, and increased in number as the Depression in the South became severe in 1896. These petitions were usually tabled without action. By and large, Booker T. Washington, rather than Turner, set the norm for Southern race relations after 1895. In a long editorial accompanying the full text of Washington's Atlanta Compromise address, Turner admired the professor's speech, yet took exception to the statement that the quote, unquote, the wisest among my race understand that the agitation of questions of social equality is the extremist folly. He was unwilling to surrender his claim to Negro rights, and while the professor stressed economic struggle, the bishop maintained that political equality was a necessary precondition to racial peace. He concluded his editorial by prophesying that, quote, with all due respect to Professor Washington personally, for we do respect him personally, he will have to live a long time to undo the harm he has done to our race. So there was some back and forth between them two. I remember reading that Bishop Turner liked what Booker T was doing in terms of the Tuskegee project, but clearly they had issues about this return to Africa thing. When Turner returned to Liberia and Sierra Leone again in 1893 and 1895 to supervise church conferences, he saw an ominous shadow. The European and white American encroachment was evident, not only in the colonial governments and commercial enterprises, but also in the missions where their race prejudice often debased the Africans. Turner wrote from West Africa in 1893 that it was common to meet white people in every direction. Quote, "Indeed, I do not like to see such an array of white faces," he complained. "It means the capture of the only spot upon the face of the globe that the black man can ever hope to be in power and demonstrate the ability of self-government." Damn. This was in 1893. As a result, Turner stepped up his colonization campaign to save Africa for the Africans. Even more portentous, the same idea took root wherever the bishop traveled in Africa. Visiting South Africa in 1898, Turner consolidated a new branch of the church composed of native Christians who had rebelled against the race prejudice in the Wesleyan missions. They had formed their own quote-unquote Ethiopian church in 1892 and later had united with the AME Church. In a region troubled by growing tension and between Britain and Boer, he traveled for 5 weeks in the Cape Province and the Boer republics, organizing churches, ordaining new ministers, meeting government officials, and above all, being seen and heard by the Africans. Turner reported that the white men in the South received him courteously, but the Africans and colored people went wild by the thousands. There are varying accounts of what he actually said to the people. Nevertheless, all who have written of the tour agree that, either directly or indirectly, he stirred up a nationalist spirit within the hearts of the Africans, which spread rapidly throughout southern Africa. One historian claims that Turner actually advocated a conspiracy to overthrow the white government so as to regain Africa for the Africans. The official South African investigation into the native churches did not accuse him of such agitation, yet the government panel reported that, quote, "This close connection between the Ethiopians and the Negroes of the southern states is viewed with grave misgiving by many South Africans, who fear that by stimulating the spirit of racial jealousy and exclusiveness, it may have a sinister influence on the future of South Africa." Listen to what these folks are saying. Listen to what these folks are saying about you linking up. It is likely that he shared with the Africans his dream of black equality because, as one scholar states, Turner was a man full of the concept of the manifest destiny of colored Americans to redeem their unhappy brethren in Africa. When he returned from South Africa, Turner threw himself into the unsuccessful fight to prevent Georgia from adopting a disfranchising law. He attracted nationwide attention when he reportedly proclaimed from a Macon platform that, quote, "To the Negro in this country, the American flag is a dirty and contemptible rag," and that, quote, "Hell is an improvement over the United States when the Negroes involved." When President Roosevelt complained about the statement to his Negro advisor, Booker T. Washington, Professor soothed the president while Turner claimed that he had been misquoted. It was clear, however, that the contempt with which he held American race discrimination steadily deepened in Turner as he grew older. Till his death in 1915, he never ceased to berate the United States and advocate his African dream. Right? Turner's immigration campaign failed for a number of reasons. Negroes were too captivated by the American dream to be tempted in an African nightmare. No matter how brightly he painted the map of Africa, most Negroes still considered it an ominous, unhealthy, dark continent. Furthermore, the opinion that Negroes live better in the north or west of the United States provided a safety valve nearer home. Right? That's an interesting concept. They dangle this idea that, well, if you get to the north, things, or the west, things are good. Right? And so people thought, well, that's closer than going all the way across, to Africa. So we'll just go, we'll just go there. And so you had the great migrations into Chicago and Los Angeles and California and stuff back in the day. The results of Turner's exhortations were not entirely negative. He did persuade some American Negroes to seek better lives in Africa. Negro intellectuals, while declining to emigrate, compensated by claiming an identity of interest with Africans, an identity which led to missionary activity and united protests against the excesses of colonialism. Turner, with others, aroused among Africans a sympathetic outcry against the excesses of American race prejudice. This reciprocal concern, a pan-Negro nationalism, has continued to play an important role in both American and African Negro thought. Bishop Turner's career and teachings exemplify an important force in American Negro thought. He urged neither integration nor accommodation with white society. Let me repeat that. He urged neither integration nor accommodation with white society. A black nationalist, he was totally disenchanted with the United States. Virtually rejected or ignored by Negro historians, Turner's African dream was the link between the pre-Civil War colonization movement and the later Chief Sam and Marcus Garvey Back to Africa movements. Although unpopular with most articulate Negroes and ignored by most whites, Turner and his followers manifested a nationalism that had always been an option for free Negro Americans. And that's the paper. We had a late start. I apologize, but we showed up. A lot of you stuck around, tuned in, even though I was late, and I appreciate you. But that was Bishop Turner's African dream. My question is, what is your dream? Is your dream an African dream? Or is it an American dream? I ask that to you guys who are live with me now. What is your dream? Is it an African one? Is it an American one? Or is it a Caribbean one? Right? I'll do a quick station ID here. I'll come back and see if anyone has any responses to that question.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
This is DAX. You tune into the Harsh Reality Podcast, providing you with social commentary on the news affecting our community. Only on
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-black perspective, where black problems are addressed with black solutions.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
Yes, indeed. Make sure to check out all the shows on KWAZ Radio. To my question, I see NYC Beauties is still here listening, an active and participant. NYC Beauty says it is an African dream, black first and always. And it goes on to say, part of my dream now is publishing photo coffee table books showcasing black excellence. Yeah, like I told you guys, make sure to check out NYC Beauty's page. He has some photography videos that are just, great stuff. Check it out. Make sure to like and subscribe to his channel. And also, if you're new here, make sure you like and subscribe to this channel. Click the bell to be notified when I'm on. And for those of you who already subscribe. Make sure you click the thumbs up button. Let's get everyone hitting the thumbs up button. That helps me going forward. All right. While I'm talking to, let me grab the invite link from the Discord. I always post these invite links that are good for 24 hours because I want to keep an eye on who's coming into the Discord, etc. But you should see in the chat room there's an invite link for the Discord. If you're not on the Discord, click the link, join today. In the Discord, I see Baka Umobo was there earlier, and he said he's barely on Discord. He forgot this thing exists. Well, brother, you have to start to put your notifications together so that you know when I'm here online, right? So anyway, that should be our dream as well. We should all have an African dream. We should see the U.S. for what it is. If you can accumulate some resources, I've talked about that FU money in the past. Get that going and get up out of here. Definitely get the mindset, the thought, the work ethic going in your families, so that your future generations, your near future generations, will get up out of here. We were reading a paper written in 1967 about a man who lived in the late 1800s into the early 1900s, who's describing Africa back in 1893 and whatnot as being beautiful and bountiful. Once we take over our land, we will have our freedom. That's where we will build our nation, right? So we got to think about these things. If you want abundance, right? If you want to see abundance in your health, your wealth, and your relationships, then you got to be in a place that fosters that kind of thing, right? You have to be in control of it. So on that note, guys, I'm going to leave you with that thought. Keep up your African dreams and sleep well. This has been another episode of the Bitter Medicine Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast with your host, Koku. If you like what you just heard, we hope you pass along our web address, bittermedicineblogs.com, to your friends and colleagues, and share our show to all your social media. Be sure to check out our archive section on our website for previous podcasts. This has been a KWAZ radio production. Join us next time for another session of the Bitter Medicine Podcast. Follow us on Facebook at Bitter Medicine Show, Twitter, Bitter Meds, Tumblr, Bitter Meds, Instagram, Bitter Medicine.